Refuting Jabari again. Yeah, what's going on, party people, in the place to be? I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Glad everybody could be here. Got to say what's up to the party people in the chat. We got New Reformation Apologetics. We got Hawkins in the building. We got our main man, CMB, the ambassador. We got Brenda M. Bodega Lady D. New. We got Apologists in Detroit in the house. Mr. Church to you. The incomparable, the indelible Nate 2D2 is in the building. Jacob Brown, man, this is good. This is good. And as always, if you have not yet already, please like, share, and subscribe. Please share this particular link to your corner of the interwebs. And also, if you like how it goes down with the BK, you can support him via PayPal. And if you'd like to be a monthly supporter of BK, you can become a patron. We get an assortment of goodies to enhance your daily Bible study. And we got my man DMG. We got CC Fox in the check-in. We got Andrea Leon. Man, this is good. It's good. You know, everybody please share. We got my man Rome in the house. You know what I mean? So, as you see, I have some illustrious guests for this evening's festivities. And I would like to start with one of the sharpest tools in the shed, one of the smartest guys I know, and I'm glad he's on our team. Of course, I'm talking about the one and only, the Bobby Brown of the UA, MJ Jackson. What's going on, sir?
Dude, when you said sharpest and the smartest, I thought you was talking about Adam Coleman. Adam,
I thought he was talking about vocab. I was gonna say.
All I know is he just called you a tool.
Boo.
And he said shed.
You guys are horrible.
Okay.
You guys are horrible.
No, what's up, good people? And gonna be talking about Jabari. So we'll try to stay calm and serious, but I mean nothing. Nothing about his scholarship is serious.
You guys are terrible.
MJ is not gonna stay calm and serious, man. He's not.
And next to him, rocking the ill red Kango, with the Puma tracksuit, looking real official, real looking like what, June of '88. You know what I mean? We got the man, the myth, the legend, Vocab Malone. What's going on, sir?
Glad to be here, and I'll stay calm.
If MJ is the Bobby Brown, does that make Vocab like the
he's the Ralph Transvant. He's John B. He's John B. They don't know.
Hey, I have been. I could never sing, but I remember going to the Ohio State Fair, and the door ladies. He looks like John B.
Oh man!
And then the next one was Sean Paul.
Vocab.
Okay, I don't see Sean Paul at all. I
used to have. Anyways,
so you went from John B to the devil that the Bible speaks of. Man, that's an ill spectrum there. Of course, we got Mr. True ID, Adam Coleman in the building. What's going on, sir?
Hey, man, doing good, man. Doing good. Got to be here, bro. I don't know what artist I would be, but, I got to be something, right? We got Bobby Brown. We got John B. I don't know, Busta Rhymes. I don't know. What can I be?
Well, I guess because of the dreads, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I was going. I'm trying to think of a singer with dreads. I don't know.
Let's see, you could be R. Kelly.
No, man. Hey.
That was inappropriate and racist all at the same time. So,
R. Kelly is
you just gave Sakari and everybody else a nice clip right there, Vocab. Good job.
Good job. What? Did he do something wrong?
Man.
Here we go, man. There you go.
This guy's
bro.
terrible.
This dude.
There you go. Phil Fox got you. The Adam Coleman, the Lennox Lewis of apologetics.
Okay, I'll take that. All right. I roll with it.
Man.
Nothing better than R. Kelly. You know what I'm saying?
Way better. Light years. So, as you guys have seen the title of the video, it's Refuting Jabari Again. And for some of us, we might be wondering where is the again part coming from? So we're gonna have a give a little backstory to what's gonna occur tonight. So about 3.5 years ago, right, for the most part, there was a debate that was held at Epiphany Fellowship in Philadelphia. Shout out to Dr. Eric Mason, between Jabari Osaze and Dr. Vince Bantu. And it was really big. And Adam reached out to me and asked me to be a part of the research team. And if I've never said it publicly, I just want to say, Adam, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of that team. You know what I mean? I really, really appreciate it. Just started my YouTube channel, you know, on just the love between Vocab and Adam just coming to New York and really inspiring me to jump on and do this. And soon after that, you know, this amazing opportunity came. And, you know, and for the record, it's not that Dr. Bantu really needs any help. He's a beast when it comes to the knowledge. Like, he just, you know. So I was just there to, you know, put a little garnish on the plate. You know, that's all.
Was that beginning? Was that beginning of like Slide Master?
Pretty much.
Like, was that
that's the origin story? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. So after that debate, me and Adam, we went on and we did a series of breakdowns of the rounds of the debate, and it really well, Adam, what do you feel? How you guys feel about that debate? Like, what impact do you guys feel like that debate had?
I love that debate. I thought it was great. I think they were both very able spokesmen for their position in their communities. There is a sense in which, you know, I do believe Bantu is at a certain another level on the scholarship tip, but to balance that out, in my opinion, Jabari is also at another level when it comes to the rhetorical skills. So yes. I thought it made for excellent back and forth, and I think anyone who watches that will learn a lot. And you know, there's lots of things we could criticize Jabari for, and we will. But you know, kudos to him for being able to actually show up, have a real debate. It's not crazy. There's fluff there, but he actually did present content. Whether you agree with it or not is another question. But so that was one of my favorite debates of all time. That was one of my favorite debates all time, you know, honestly. I love it. And I just love everyone in the room. It was just such a vibe. I wish we could do something like that once a year. That's my take. But anyways.
No, it was a dope vibe. I agree. You know, I mean, it was you know, being there in the room was super dope. You know, getting a chance to, you know, meet some of the people that you see on YouTube and all that kind of stuff, and really see them, you know, try to, you know, hold their own, and you know, and as far as Jabari is concerned, in the face of, you know, critique and whatever. And I think that again, I second what Vocab said. I think that he's very good at engaging a crowd. You know what I'm saying? And I think that, you know, you can't take that away from him for sure. You know, content for content. If we're going bar for bar, you know what I mean, then you know, obviously, I think that he you know, resoundingly lost the debate. But I think he did represent, you know, his position as best as anybody from the conscious community could, you know, and which is the reason why. Somebody saying, turn my mic up. Yep. Oh, can y'all not hear me, or
it's a little low.
Really? Okay. I have to work on that in a second. Just
okay, no problem.
All right. Well, let me just camp out there, and I'll get my mic straight. But you know, I think that you know, Jabari did what he could do. You know what I mean? And you know, at the end of the day, facts are what they are. You know what I mean? So, you know, I'll just kind of camp out there for now. I know we got a lot to say, so I'm trying to, you know, bite my tongue a little bit and leave it at that. But I will say this though, as far as the effects of the debate, I think that it was a watershed moment that has created ripple effects from then till now. They're still feeling the shockwave of essentially the conscious community that being represented there that day, taking a L, you know, to you know, the Christian representative, you know, Vince Bantu. So yeah,
cool. MJ.
Yes, I will not be biting my tongue. Jabari performed, and just because you can perform or be performative doesn't mean that you present anything that's true or anything that's scholarly. I think we as an African American community have to step our level of understanding up to be able to see style and to also discern substance. And so Bishop T.D. Jakes is a great performer. but his theology sucks, and he doesn't handle the biblical text with care. So, I mean, I'm not at all impressed that you can perform, but I guess that goes a long way culturally speaking, and that's just something that we got to work on, because as we'll see later on and throughout this program, you know, we're going to pick his sources apart. You know, we're going to read some things that he left out, and you know, we're going to look past rhetorical skills and being performative and all that stuff, and we're going to try to get down to the facts and get down to the truth of the matter.
Amen to that. So, with that being said, well, actually, before we get into that, some might wonder why even care, right? Why even care about refuting the claims? But actually, even before, I'm kind of jumping a little bit. So, fast forward, you know, a few years later, Jabari was supposed to debate Garfield Reed on a similar topic, and the debate didn't occur. If you want to know Garfield's take on why, you can go to his channel. We're not going to have that discussion here. You can talk to the man yourself or hear from the man yourself. But Jabari did present what he was going to show during a live he did with Sonetta. And it's a very similar argument that he used during the Bound to debate. So since he's still propagating these claims, I think it's only right for us to continue to refute said claims. And if you're wondering why, you know, because I know even some believers feel like, well, why go through all this? You know, preach the gospel, right? Well, 2 Corinthians 10, starting in verse 5, King James, because I like how the King James renders this. Says here, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. You know, we're here to cast down imaginations, you know, against the gospel. You know, if you're going to take the time out to try to shake the faith of other believers, then we're going to defend that faith. And that's the reason why we're here. We're not here just because we want to have some sort of rhetorical battle with Jabari. It's like he's attacking the gospel. We're here to defend it. Okay? So, see, it beats funny. That's an inside joke. It's an inside joke. So, what are some of your preliminary thoughts on his presentation, his most recent presentation? Anyway,
His PowerPoint was fancy.
Okay.
A lot of my compliments will be on style over substance. You know,
I can see that. Yeah. I see a pattern.
Well, actually, I'm a bit of kudos. You know what I mean? I'm going to say that. As a matter of fact, first of all, can y'all hear me now? Or
yeah, I get you.
Am I clear? Or?
It's a little boxy, but
that's weird.
Well, he is Lennox Lewis.
It's a little boxy. I don't even know what that means, but
like it sounds like you're like in a box, like it's muffled.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Maybe it's just
weird.
me.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
I don't know. But anyway, you know, shout out to Amir Shafra. I see him in the chat, and I think actually in this video, Jabari mentioned him like once or twice. You know what I mean? He got a little upset, but I think that's because Amir is, you know, just busting his chops. You know what I mean? With substance and facts. You know what I mean? And he just has a hard time dealing with that. But anyway, as far as his presentation, I mean, to his credit, I mean, I think that he does a better job than most when it comes to presenting his position in a condensed and organized way. Now, I think that the arguments are still pseudo. I think that the arguments are still, you know, I won't say, I'll refrain from saying pseudo. The arguments are not reflective of somebody who is responsible, like scholastically responsible. Like, I don't think that his case would hold weight anywhere outside of Sonetta's YouTube channel or a channel like that or some venue like that. But nevertheless, when it comes to organization and kind of making a concise case, I think that, you know, he did well as far as that. Shout out to what up, John? What's good with you, bro? So that's kind of my case. It's the same old arguments repackaged and framed in a way that seems more sophisticated, but at bottom it's the same bad arguments for his position.
Cool. All right. And with that being said, I think we should go and start looking at his presentation. So, Adam, if you could just fast forward to when he actually begins to present.
First, Dr. John Henry Clarke.
Okay.
Amir Eshrafra. I hope I'm not destroying your name, Amir. That's not my goal. What I'm going to say to you is, I told you in the chat, if you believe that
was totally by accident. I didn't even mean to play that.
That was great, though. That was great.
And you should know he's been talking about this topic and talking about me for years. We need to.
Real quick, he's going into like his kind of prelude. Is this where you want to start, or do you want?
No, you can fast forward this. I want to get to the actual argument.
Okay. So past like these clips.
Yeah, you can pass that. I don't. Yeah. Right. Okay, right
and
here.
While he's fast forwarding it, can I just say that Jabari is trying to present this with a scholarly veneer, that he's presenting a historical model, right?
Right.
And anybody who understands history, or when you're doing history, he says he's doing forensic history. But anybody who understands that when you're doing
right there's good,
historiography,
MJ.
When you're doing historiography, you're presenting an abductive case for something, and there are several criteria that go into that. And I guess we can get into that after we get started.
Cool. All right, let it rip, Adam.
All right.
Listen to Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen.
Let me just ask for this. Let's just say this. People believe.
Yeah, you can skip this too. I don't. Yeah.
Listen to Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen.
Okay, right here. Oh, wait.
We're wholly taken from the Kemetic tradition. So you have to recognize that as you look at my saviors. By the way, I will not go through all of the 7 sections of the saviors model today. As you can imagine, that would not be something I would do in a debate or here. But you're going to see at least 3 of those sections today. Next, you're going to see that these same early Christians actually led a violent and brutal obscurement of the Kemetic tradition. So you're going to see that these archetypes, these ideas were taken from Kemet, and then you're going to see those people destroy, or at least seek to destroy, the original. We're going to talk about the destruction today. And then finally, you're going to see the near confession of early Christians and others. Because many of these individuals, the leaders, the early Christian fathers, the theologians, they understood the origins. You're going to see these 3 sections in my discussion today. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion around it. Let's continue. This is so you see the 3 sections of the argument that I'm going to be putting forward today. Once again, the Savior's model, the Christian destruction of the Kemetic tradition, and then early Christians literally implicating themselves. You're going to have to pay attention to all 3 of these sections in order to truly understand what occurred. First, there are 4 things that we need to keep in mind as we embrace our roles as ancient forensic history detectives.
Pause that for a minute.
And as
forensic history detectives, that's what he's doing. He's doing forensic history. He also mentioned the term archetype. We will be addressing that term later on. And also, we're not going to be able to deal with everything the first time out. There will be a part 2 to our commentary. Just want to put that out there as well. But continue, Adam.
All right.
As we do this, I want you to get that there are 4 things 4 things that those detractors will continue to say. And I'm going to say to you, those 4 portions are absolutely, I think, some of the most ridiculous things that one can say. That's what we're going to see. And I want you to also recognize that these arguments, they were trying to seed the territory, seed the field, seed the battleground before our debate occurred. With these, I think, poorly framed and illogical arguments. The first one is, what is stealing? They attempted to say to you that because the title of the debate was Christianity stolen from Kemet, that the word stolen would have been their out, would have allowed them to win.
All right, you can stop there.
In many ways, as you might.
All right, so he's defining terms, which is good, right? It's always good to define terms so that we don't speak past each other. So he's saying that this is what the Christians have done, that we have taken the property of another wrongfully, and especially as a habitual or regular practice, right? Can you just fast forward just a little bit more, Adam? Just a smidge. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Continues. Take a look at this. What if I didn't know the property was stolen? To be convicted of possession of stolen property, actual knowledge of it being stolen is not required. Did you hear what I just said? According to the laws of New York State, I think this is interesting. It says that conviction of stolen property, actual knowledge of it being stolen, is not required. All that is necessary is that you should have known.
So Jabari is referencing New York State law when it comes to dealing with the ancient Near East. Is that problematic to my panelists? And if so, why?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, let me just say, at the outset,
Well,
for people on the left, can y'all hear me? Or
Yeah, bro.
yeah, people on the left hand of the screen, you see it says still Stephen Bilkis and Associates. So he's quoting a person he refers to as a popular or well-known New York lawyer, and he's quoting that person's renderings of what stealing is, what plagiarism is, and so on and so forth. And he's working from those definitions, and he's going to apply them to the ancient Near East. Now, if anachronism was a person, I mean, goodness knows. I mean, that's Jabari all day. It's like when you're taking a concept. I mean, literally, you're going to take New York State law and you're going to apply that to what was going on in the ancient Near East. Now, I'm just going to think, I'm just going to throw out there, as far as things that I've read, typically what people will want to do is they want to understand what was going on, among, I mean, the indigenous people of the land. What was going on back then? You're not going to start from today and then import an idea of like what plagiarism is and try to read that back into ancient history. You know what I mean? But it just, I'm trying to be nice, BK. So maybe I'll just stop here. But what I really want to say is, for somebody who claims to be an historian, no historian alive, other than I guess Jabari, would try to take a part of New York State law and apply it to the ancient Near East and think that they've made some sort of substantive case. So he's already, again, I agree with you. It's great that he's defining terms. Unfortunately, he's defining them based upon concepts and ideas that are about, 4, 5, 6, 7 millennia after the period that he really wants to tackle. So,
yeah.
anyway.
You remember that part where he criticized Garfield scholars that he had interviewed? And part of the implication seemed to be like, hey, these are like white people mainly. You guys remember he showed all of it?
Yeah.
And he was like, he's not equipped to have the debate. It's like, Steve Bilkis. How can he, being someone who descends from a people who do nothing but steal, then accurately tell us what stealing is? That's like asking the oppressor what oppression means. This is someone who was not equipped to handle the debate.
Right. Oh man, that's terrible, bro.
MJ, I'm sorry, I was muted.
Yeah. Jabari is dipping in the Tom Who's bag for to set up his quote unquote historical hypothesis. But let me just point this out. I think C.B. Hand McCullough lists several factors which historians typically weigh in testing the historical hypothesis. Number 6, it says the hypothesis must be disconfirmed by fewer accepted beliefs. So when we're dealing with ancient cultures, I mean, was there any type of belief, any type of standard? I'm not saying that that plagiarism isn't a thing, but was that even an accepted belief back then? So right then and there, Jabari once again is doing something that's not scientific
or
it's
historical.
not scholarly
Historians
or
don't do that.
historical.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. We're forensic historians. Let's look at a 21st century New York lawyer to understand these concepts.
Right.
About
So,
the ancient Near East. Right.
So let's get into it. So this is one of the slides from his presentation. He goes on to define plagiarism, right? To steal and pass off the ideas and words of another as one's own, use another production without crediting the source, right? All right, so let's get into this. All right. So this is from John Walton from the Flood, from the Dictionary of the Old Testament, Pentateuch. He says, this is far from the case when comparing the biblical account to Mesopotamian versions. Second, an important distinction must be drawn between borrowing from literature and reacting to literature. If the biblical account is loaded with polemic, it must have a level of awareness of the Mesopotamian traditions, or in this case, the Kemetic ones. But the intention of the biblical narrator is not simply to offer a recension, or as more often suggested, to convert the story to a Yahwistic perspective. Polemic is far more aggressive than simple conversion. While conversion may border on plagiarism, polemic is interactive and critical. So a lot of times when you see certain ideas that are shared with other cultures in the Bible, because first of all, no culture in the ancient Near East existed in a vacuum. Israel didn't exist in a vacuum, neither did Kemet, neither did Mesopotamia, neither did the whole Levant region. Okay? They all knew each other, they traded with each other, so there's going to be admixture, right? So to understand the theological points that the Bible's making, it's going to use material that people knew already. And it wasn't that it's imitating or stealing, it's using familiar language for polemical purposes, right? There's a distinction between borrowing from literature and reacting to literature, right? Mr. Walton also says from the last world of Genesis 1, as a result, we are not looking at ancient literature to try to decide whether Israel borrowed from some of the literature that was known to them. It is to be expected that the Israelites held many concepts and perspectives in common with the rest of the ancient world. This is far different from suggesting literature was borrowed or copied. This is not even a case of Israel being influenced by the people around them. Rather, we simply recognize the common conceptual worldview that existed in ancient times. We should therefore not speak of Israel being influenced by that world. They were part of that world. See, I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised. You're gonna see me with a Yankee fitted and some Timbs and some camouflage. You're gonna see that. Am I biting New York style? No, I'm from the town. I'm from here. I'm one of the 5 boroughs in the city. Now, dudes in Queens, they'll wear a Met fitted. You know, dudes in Uptown, they might wear their Timbs a little differently. But we're all from the same place. We're from the town. I'm from the town. I'm not copying. You know what I mean? So for Israel to convey what it needs to convey, it's going to use a shared language and motifs. It's not plagiarism. All right. So, and to Adam's point about this retrofitting this concept of plagiarism back into the ancient Near East, it's odd because in this book entitled Forgery and Counterforgery, the use of literary deceit in early Christian polemics, Bart D. Ehrman, he says there is no evidence of any proprietary laws at any time or place involving the concern to keep writings in general intact and safe from borrowing or quote unquote stealing, as the agents call it. There's no proprietary loss. What's proprietary loss? Proprietary relates to ownership and the rights an owner may exercise in regards to his or her property or information. A proprietor is one that possesses, owns, and holds exclusive right to something legally. What is proprietary often refers to proprietary information. Proprietary information is important, possibly sensitive information that a company owns. This information usually gives the company competitive advantages in its markets. Right? Protection to these proprietary articles are through intellectual property law, copyright, patents, trademarks. Okay? The concept of intellectual property, the idea that an idea can be owned, is a child of the European Enlightenment. It was only when people began to believe that knowledge came from the human mind, working upon the senses rather than through divine revelation assisted by the study of ancient texts, that it became possible to imagine humans as creators and hence owners of new ideas rather than mere transmitters of eternal verities. All right, this is on an intellectual property published by MIT Press on behalf of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences.
So I should blame the white man for my copyright strikes.
Yes.
Hold on. So you're saying Jabari is an intellectual capitalist. In other words, he's a student of John Locke. Basically.
Well, he's a plagiarist too, right? By his own standards, right? Yeah. Like, because he's not giving credit to these folks for, you know, his use of this phrase and this concept. He's just throwing it around, you know, without giving credit to the people who, you know, according to what you just read,
he did give credit to New York state law.
Oh yeah,
he did give credit.
Right.
All right. One more thing here. Besides being distinctively modern, intellectual property is a dense concept woven together from at least three complex strands of jurisprudence: copyright, patent, and trademark, each with its own sources in pre-modern custom and law, and each with its own trajectory into our own era. Still, copyright and the complementary concepts of authors' rights and literary property in continental law, the focus of this essay, are the core of the modern concept of intellectual property. It was here in the 18th century that the language of, quote, ideas and, quote, property first came into contact with one another and first forged a legal bond. And it was here, too, that the very idea of a property right in ideas was most sharply contested at the outset and to the present day. So this idea of stealing ideas as property then happened to the Enlightenment era and into the 18th century. Right. So again, you're smuggling modern day concepts into ancient times.
But this is what he does, though. I mean, you know, shout out to Pastor Bennett. I just saw Pastor Bennett, you know, in the chat. Shout out to him because he actually, in this video that we're reviewing now, he hopped in on a dialogue on Sidenetta's channel in regard to this, you know, and interacted with Jabari directly. And, you know, he made a point. Pastor Bennett made it what I thought was an excellent point, that Jabari has a habit of taking quotes from people and kind of like refurbishing them and leveraging them in a way that, and just basically making them say, those quotes say what he wants to say, what he wants them to say, rather than, you know, taking them as they are. Like he has a talent. Jabari has a talent for taking things out of context, essentially. You know what I mean? And I think that was a great point. I think if you look throughout Jabari's presentation, what you'll see is over and over again, him taking things out of context, whether it be, you know, lawyers from the 21st century, or whether it be scriptures that he's quoting out of context, whatever it may be. You know, N.T. Wright, you know, this is just what he does. You know what I mean? And I think it's unfortunate, but I think that, you know, at some point, due to just the habit that he's in of taking people out of context, he's really kind of made himself an unreliable source of information, you know, in my view. So yeah.
All right, so let's get back to the video.
And we're going to show you that those folks knew what they were doing. Take a look at how I am arguing that this information found its way in thick form of stealing.
Okay.
But
Right before that.
filtered through the other
Okay.
mystery traditions in the Mediterranean region. And before it got from Kemet to those other traditions, it was filtered to their social norms. And then
my bad. I'm actually gonna I want to actually say something about what he's saying right here before you get to your point. If I
Go
could,
for it.
I'm actually
Go
gonna
for it.
jump back just
Sure.
a little bit and then make a point here.
Big up the
spiritual
title a
traditions,
lot.
in this instance, we're focusing on Christianity, took direct, and Stephen
Oh,
Jabari. Take a look at how I am arguing that this information found its way into the Abrahamic traditions. We see the Kemetic tradition all the way on the left. And the Abrahamic spiritual traditions, in this instance, we're focusing on Christianity, took directly from the Kemetic tradition. But it was filtered through their own foreign social norms. So what you've seen that comes directly from Kemet is not exactly how it occurred in Kemet, because they remixed it according to their worldview. In addition to that, they also got some of the Kemetic spiritual tradition filtered through the other mystery traditions in the Mediterranean region. And before it got from Kemet to those other traditions, it was filtered through their social norms. And then also, of course, the Abrahamic tradition, getting it from the mystery traditions, also had it filter again through their own social norms. I want to be really clear. I am not saying that Christianity is an exact copy of the Kemetic tradition. If I was arguing that, I would be a Christian today. But I want you to understand how this information, I want you to have a logical model so you understand how this information made its way into Christianity.
okay. I just want to pause right here because this is a really important methodological point. And MJ, I feel like this is something that you could really key in on because I feel like this gets into some of your area of expertise. But this is the model that the Jabari has laid out in terms of how it is that Kemetic spiritual traditions somehow found the Abrahamic traditions a landing place, if you will, in the Abrahamic traditions. At another point, he'll say that the major aspects of the Christian tradition come from specifically from Kemet, and he said Kemet and only Kemet. But he's saying that this is how it happened. So you have Kemet on the one hand, and then somehow through foreign social norms, and also through mystery traditions in the Mediterranean region, and then eventually filtered through all those things into the Abrahamic traditions. I just want to throw something out here from a methodological standpoint, right? When historians are looking at explanations, right? When they're looking to reconstruct what happened in any given point, in any given period, they're going to use certain criteria to determine what happened back in the day, right? One criteria, or one way of evaluating a possible explanation for how or why something happened is this notion of simplicity, right? Simplicity, right? Now, it's kind of like, let's say if I walk into a house, and, I got 5 kids, right? If I walk into the crib and there's a broken vase on the floor, right? And I walk in and my daughter says, the boys are playing around, they knocked over the vase and it broke. Okay. And then I go on to question the boys about it. And they're like, well, we were playing outside and then some aliens showed up. And then there was this giant golden duck, that came from the pool in the backyard. And those two things were wrestling one another. And then mom came downstairs to try to stop them. And she knocked over the vase. Before the vase fell, and there's all these different elements to the story. I'm being somewhat funny, but the more elements you add to the explanation, the less likely it is to be true, right? So when historians are looking at explanations, when they're comparing 2 hypotheses on how something happened or why it happened, right, they're going to be looking at which one of these explanations explains the data, fully, each aspect of the data, which of these explanations explains the data well, and then also which one of them is more simple. Now, when it comes to someone like us, when we're looking at how it is that these that Christian beliefs came to be what they are, we were going to appeal to what was going on in, Israel's culture and development, their history, and so on and so forth. There's a cultural heritage there. There's a historical narrative there already available that readily explains how these folks came to believe what they believe. But if he's going to add more items into the pot, not only is he going to have to account for like where these ideas came from, he's got to talk about these foreign social norms that he's appealing to. That's another piece of the puzzle that he's putting in that he never touches on in his presentation. What are these foreign social norms that you're appealing to, right? He's going to talk about the mystery traditions in the Mediterranean. He just throws them out there in his model, but he never doubles back and says, okay, well, here are the specific mystery traditions. Here are the specific social norms that were present within them. Here's how they interacted with the foreign social norms that I was referring to earlier. And here's how those foreign social norms and mystery traditions became like this conduit from the Kemetic spiritual tradition to the Abrahamic religion. He doesn't account for those mystery traditions nor the foreign social norms that he puts in his model. So there's these two big pieces of his model that are missing from his later presentation, right? Both of which are essential to how he's saying the Kemetic spiritual tradition is, gave rise to the Abrahamic traditions, right? So we got more pieces to the puzzle, and some of those pieces are unexplained, right? And just on that basis alone, if you apply this notion of simplicity, you have these unexplained variables. His explanation can't possibly be the preferred one. It can't possibly be the one that a rational person would accept in terms of how Christianity came to be, or the Abrahamic religions came to be. Does that make sense? I mean,
That's good stuff.
Yeah, so he does that to try to set himself up against all the rebuffs he knows that are going to come. So anytime someone points out the obvious, well, this is clearly not from Kemet. Well, that's because it's not exactly like Kemet, and that's from another tradition. It's just like a false defense he's trying to set up there. And if we're going to talk about plagiarism, I just want to show everyone something from a galaxy a long time ago, from a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. 7 years ago, I put out a video talking about the Quran is Spaceballs. So who's plagiarizing who?
Wow.
Look at the date on that.
That's deep.
7 years ago. I had already done this. Now, I don't know if he saw my stuff, because I actually have multiple videos on this, and I did it in a debate against Shadid Lewis. I actually dropped this analogy, but in a different way. I wasn't trying to say the same thing he's trying to say with it, but I did. So I don't know. Beat you to it, man.
And I want to chime in on something you said, Vocab, because that's so on point. I wanted to land with this, is that what he's doing is lowering the bar for himself so low by saying, like, oh, well, it's not, Christianity is not a direct copy. It was filtered through these other mystery systems. They were filtered through these social norms, neither of which I'm going to explain and account for in my model. I'm just going to tell you that they were there. I'm not going to explain which ones and how so. I'm just going to throw it out there. But Christianity was filtered through all these things. And so he could point to any supposed similarity between, Kemet and Christianity. And he's already set the bar so low for himself and muddied the waters so much that now all he's going to do is spend the rest of his time pointing out the thinnest possible similarities between Christianity and or what he believes to be Christianity and what he believes to be Kemet, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or the connections thereof.
I mean,
it just makes for a really weak case when you set the bar that low and don't explain key aspects of your model.
If all that really happened, he should be able to show us, but he's telling us this is what happened. And it's like, well, if really all that happened, how would you even be able to detect the Kemet? And so that's why he's like saying he's a detective. But it's funny. He defines these random things with lawyers that are not that important. Most Christians don't use the defense of, well, it wasn't stolen. No, we say, no, your facts are wrong about this. You're out of order with your timeline. It's actually the borrowing's the other way around, or that's not a true parallel, or you're misrepresenting the Christian position, or you baptize Kemet to make it sound, these are the things we really say. Not, well, I think you got the definition of stealing wrong there. Like, that's our real defense, right? So we're wasting words here. We're wasting time. We're wasting spaces. But let me just say, he says they filtered it through their worldview. What is their worldview? What is that? Because if it's Hebraic, the Hebraic religious worldview was to stay far away from your pagan traditions. And that's what they did. Not, let me grab this and let me grab that and let me grab this. That's what they did in Kemet. More so.
Yeah, he just cut
Right.
himself.
He just cut himself. Hey, can I
Right,
share,
right.
share this slide right quick, Alfredo, right quick? Because I feel like this describes what you were talking about, vocab. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy is an informal fallacy, which is essentially is ignoring the differences between two things while focusing on the similarities, thus coming to an inaccurate conclusion. That's the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. And I feel like, to your point, vocab, that's what he's kind of set the stage to, in his mind, try to validate his Texas sharpshooter fallacy conclusions. Because now what he's going to do, let me backtrack. So with the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, it's kind of like this idea. Imagine if I'm like a shooter and I'm taking aim at like a barn or something like that. I'm just shooting all over the place. I'm leaving bullet holes in a barn. And then after I leave these bullet holes, I then go and draw a bullseye around a set of bullet holes to make it seem as though I was hitting the target, right? That's essentially what the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is. And so that's what Jabari is doing, right? He's just throwing out these loose connections between, or this is what he will be doing, showing out loose connections between Kemetic and Christianity. And it's like, okay, we're going to go back in time and kind of just draw what seems to be some sort of circle around and make it seem as though these things are all connected when really they aren't connected. And you can see that they're not connected because he doesn't give you the necessary mechanisms, if you will, to show how one got from one culture to the other. And he doesn't show you things like those foreign social norms and the Mediterranean mystery systems that he claims that they were filtered through. That's the Texas sharpshooter fallacy all day. So I just wanted to share that.
All right.
Number 2, what if we're actually talking about plagiarism? Is that stealing? By the way, this image of a Madonna and child from Cuba is fascinating to me. You can see an extremely dark, an extremely black Mary, and then what looks like a extremely light-skinned Jesus. There's a lot being said here. We had a lot that is being said here.
All right, stop that.
So what about plagiarism? Is plagiarism stealing? Let's go back to Merriam-Webster
Stop it,
again.
Adam.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
So he shows you this, quote, Black Madonna from Cuba. He says, I have a lot of questions about it. And then he moves on. He doesn't tell you even what the questions are that he has, right? So, so he talks about this Black Madonna. Yeah.
Isn't he trying to say this is them kind of telling you a black religion gave birth to a white religion?
It seems like that's what he's implying. Yeah, he does stuff like that a lot.
It's so
where
funny.
He'll imply something without actually arguing for it.
Right.
And I think he's trying to persuade.
He wants you to
audience.
come with your own conclusion. He throws that and then keeps it moving, right?
Right.
So, but the thing is, it's not a Madonna, though. Here's another angle of the same photo. It's actually Yemaya, mother of fishes and queen of the oceans. It's one of the most powerful orishas in the syncretic religion Santeria. Orishas are nature spirits that are originated in the Yoruba religion of Africa. Yemaya was originally a river goddess from Nigeria who traveled across the oceans when her people were enslaved, and she became the goddess of the oceans. She is considered to be the mother of all living things and rules the waters of the earth. She has a number of caminos or roads which reflect different aspects of womanhood, ranging from the nurturing mother to the fierce machete-wielding warrior. She also has secretized Catholic saints, including the Virgin Mary, Stella Maris, and the Virgin of Regla. So she's synchronized with Mary, but that's not Mary. That's not the Madonna. That's Yemaya. But we're doing forensic history, though, right? And here's a wider angle of the same photo.
It looks so funny when
you gotta stop, man.
It's like some
Yemaya.
Let me show you my Yemaya room.
Yimmy.
All right.
Give me the mic and let me take it away. On the natural charge, bon voyage.
All right, so let's continue.
By the way, this image of a Madonna and child from Cuba is fascinating to me. You can see an extremely dark, an extremely black Mary, and then what looks like a extremely light-skinned Jesus. There's a lot being said here. We had a lot that is being said here. So what about plagiarism? Is plagiarism stealing? Let's go back to Merriam-Webster again. They say plagiarism is to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own, to use another's production without crediting the source. Let's be clear that plagiarizing is another word. It's a specific form of stealing. And that is what we're talking about here as well. Let's continue. The other thing that you're going to hear, this is the third thing you need to keep in mind as you look at this entire
You can
debate.
fast forward this part.
The other thing that you're going to
But
need
he
to
doesn't
hear
want to do this
is you're also going to understand that this is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it
Where you want to fast forward to?
a little bit more.
Okay.
actually is the last text. Take a listen to Deuteronomy 12, verses 1 to 3. It says, there are
I'm gonna back it up just a little bit because I'm gonna comment on this.
the statutes. There are statutes and judgments, but I want you to, and instead of saying this is part of the origin of our tradition, instead of giving respect to the creators of those ideas, they called them demons and pagans. They destroyed their temples, murdered some of them, and even destroyed their text. That's what we actually see. We are not seeing syncretism. We are seeing a dastardly act of theft. That's what we're seeing. Take a look at this really quickly. You're seeing again the image of me standing in the temple of Philae and showing you the Christian vandalism that occurred there. We'll talk more about this later. But I want you to recognize that one of these things that you are looking at is you're actually going to understand that the standard for how things were stolen comes directly from the biblical text. Take a listen to Deuteronomy 12, verses 1 to 3. It says, there are statutes and judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land, which the Lord God of thy fathers given to thee to possess it. All the days that ye live upon the earth, ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess serve their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills, and under every green tree. And ye shall overthrow their altars, and break their pillars, and burn their groves with fire. And ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. Let us be clear that it is the Christian tradition, in fact, the biblical narrative itself, which puts forward this type of violent and brutal destruction.
Like the video.
Stop it
Thumb
there.
up the
That's a good
video.
place to stop it. Stop it right there. Yeah,
That is
yeah,
what
Adam.
you are seeing here. That is what you are seeing here.
Give me one
The
second.
Bible demands the destruction of these things, demands destruction of these places, demands that you destroy altars and images and pillars. We cannot be talking about syncretism.
Okay, that's what I wanted to capture right there. Can I share my screen real quick?
Yes, you can.
For this slide right quick. So earlier I talked about Jabari having a talent for taking things out of context, and I feel like with respect to the Bible, this is a perfect example, right? So I'm just going to read again. This is Deuteronomy 12. This is what he quoted. Deuteronomy 12 verses 1 through 3. It says, these are the decrees and laws that you must be careful to follow in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you. Where are you supposed to be following these laws? In the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you to possess, as long as you live in the land. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under the spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, burn their Asherah poles in the fire, cut down the idols of their gods, and wipe out their names from those places. Right. So again, that's Deuteronomy 12, 1 through 3 that he just read. Now, mind you, first of all, we're talking about somebody in Jabari who has claimed that he's an historian, right? He's also claimed that he's very, I guess, well versed in the Christian tradition. You know, he claims that he knows what he's talking about with respect to Christianity, right? Now, here's the thing. The way that he treats this verse is that he uses it as he recites it as if this is the Bible giving like a ongoing, eternal, without restriction green light for Christians to, you know, destroy temples and do the kind of vandalism that he's pointing to in Kemet. But anybody who has a basic understanding, you know, the scriptures will tell you, will understand, will know that Deuteronomy 12, 1-3, first of all, the people that he's talking to is the nation state of Israel. Like God is establishing Israel as a nation state, right? And he's telling them to go into a specific place at a specific point in time, and in the midst of that conquest, remove the idols from amongst those areas, right? This is not like some ongoing, never-ending green light for, you know, followers of God to destroy temples wherever they go. That's not in any possible way. There's no possible way you can take this chapter in context, this verse, these series of verses in context, and come to that conclusion, right? God is giving a specific mandate to a specific people as he establishes Israel as a nation state to go into a specific land that they are to populate and remove idols from that land. That's what God is saying here. And so when Jabari is using this passage to suggest that the Bible is, as he said, commanding you to tear down altars and commanding people to, you know, to do away with all these false gods and their idols and so on and so forth, and that's why the Christians, you know, in the first century did what they did, is either one or two things. Either he's biblically illiterate, which I suspect to be the case. He doesn't understand how to properly interpret the scriptures. And I don't mean like in a special pleading sort of way, like, oh, you got to come to our conclusion. I just mean just basic reading comprehension, right? Jabari doesn't understand how to approach the scriptures with basic reading comprehension and take things in context, right? It's either that or he's dishonest, or he knows what this text is. He knows that it's limited to a specific people, time, place, and so forth, and is not you know, some sort of ongoing license that the first century Christians would have appealed to in order to do what they did. And he's just being dishonest, you know. Right. Maybe there's another possibility. I don't know. But I think in fairness, I'm trying to be nice. I'm going to just kind of put the first one on and say he just flat out doesn't know what he's talking about with respect to Christianity and how these things work. Last thing I'm going to say is that, again, you know, there's no good reason to think, like, let's just look at Matthew chapter 28. I'm not going to go there now, but Jesus gives the mandate for the New Testament believer is to go out and preach the gospel to all nations. You know what I'm saying? Discipling them, you know what I'm saying? Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's the mandate for the church. It's not to go around, you know, shattering idols and so on and so forth. There's nothing in the New Testament about Christians being mandated to go out and to just go around destroying stuff. That's just flat out not there. But interestingly enough, shout out again, you know, to Pastor Bennett. He pointed this out in their dialogue at the end of this video. He said is for all of Jabari's talk about showing, you know, some sort of stealing of, you know, Christians stealing from Kemet, throughout this presentation, he only appealed to like maybe one or two scriptures from the New Testament. One would think that if you're going to try to say that Christians are leveraging, you know, content, you know, as they develop this Christian worldview, that in the primary Christian text, I'm saying the first expression of first century Christianity on wax, if you will, you would think that you would want to go there and establish your case. But the fact that he doesn't do that is very telling. I think it's, you know, the fact that, I think he's biblically illiterate. He doesn't know the scriptures. He doesn't really know how to approach them. And he really struggles with reading comprehension in that regard.
And with that being said, so if it's not that, Adam, right? Do we find maybe, is there a cultural phenomenon within Kemet that might give an answer to why we might see the quote unquote vandalism?
Right.
Let's see.
Right.
This is Billberg's research is now the basis of the poignant exhibition Striking Power, Iconoclasm in Ancient Egypt. A selection of objects from the Brooklyn Museum's collection will travel to the Pulitzer Arts Foundation later this month under the co-direction of the latter associate's curator, Stephanie Weissenberg. Pairing damaged statues and reliefs dating from the 25th century BCE to the 1st century CE, with intact counterparts The show testifies to ancient Egyptian artifacts, political and religious functions, and the entrenched culture of iconoclasm that led to their mutilation. The consistency of the patterns where damage is found in sculpture suggests that it's purposeful, Bilberg says, citing myriad political, religious, personal, and criminal motivations for acts of vandalism. Discerning the difference between accidental damage and deliberate vandalism came down to recognizing such patterns. A protruding nose on a three-dimensional statue is easily broken, he conceded, but the plot thickens when flat reliefs also sport smashed noses. The ancient Egyptians, it's important to note, ascribed important powers to images of the human form. They believed that the essence of a deity could inhabit an image of that deity, or in the case of mere mortals, part of that deceased human being's soul could inhabit a statue inscribed for that particular person. These campaigns of vandalism were therefore intended to, quote, deactivate an image's strength, as Bellberg put it. Egyptian state religion, Bilberg explained, was seen as a, quote, an arrangement where kings on earth provide for the deity, and in return, the deity takes care of Egypt. Statues and reliefs were a meeting point between the supernatural and this world, he said, only inhabited or, quote, revivified when the ritual is performed, and acts of iconoclasm would disrupt that power. The damaged part of the body is no longer able to do its job, Bilberg explained. Without a nose, the statue's spirit ceases to breathe, so that the vandal is effectively killing it. To hammer the ear off a statue of a god would make it unable to hear a prayer. In statues intended to show human beings making offerings to gods, the left arm, most commonly used to make offerings, is cut off so that the statue's function can't be performed. The right hand is often found axed in statues receiving offerings. Indeed, iconoclasm on a grand scale was primarily political in motive, Bilberg writes in the exhibition Catalog for Striking Power. Defacing statues aided ambitious rulers and would-be rulers with rewriting history to their advantage. Over the centuries, this erasure often occurred along gendered lines. The legacies of two powerful Egyptian queens whose authority and mystique fueled the cultural imagination, Hatshepsut and Nefertiti, were largely erased from visual culture. So much for the black woman as God, huh? Bilberg appraised the skill evidenced by iconoclasts. Quote, they were not vandals, he clarified. They were not recklessly and randomly striking out works of art. In fact, the targeted precision of their chisels suggested that they were skilled laborers, trained and hired for this exact purpose. Often in the Pharaonic period, Bilberg said, it's really only the name of the person who is targeted in the inscription. This means that the person doing the damage could read. So, in Egyptian culture, when they were done with a particular pharaonic reign, or maybe the god of that particular king, to show that they were no longer dealing with this, they deactivated the statues.
How you deactivate a god, bro? That's crazy.
But this is a Egyptian thing, right?
Right.
And here's an example of what Mr. Bilberg is talking about, right? Okay, this is the last part. It says the understanding of these statues changed over time as cultural mores shifted. In the early Christian period in Egypt, between the 1st and 3rd century CE, the indigenous gods inhabiting the sculptures were feared as pagan demons. To dismantle paganism, its ritual tools, especially statues making offerings, were attacked. So when these ancient Kemetic people heard the gospel of Jesus and made Jesus Lord, they continued the cultural phenomenon of iconoclasm. Because, you know, a lot of times they say that, well, Christianity wipes away the culture of the African. Not here. It was very African to deactivate statues of previous worship deities and kings. So now that Jesus is the king, what do you think they did? What do you think they did? So
I mean, it's really almost like a first century Egyptian like spiritual warfare type of a thing. You know what I mean? Like, he like Jabari wants to paint the picture that these Christians were out of pocket and doing something that was, foreign to African tradition. And they were just wilding. They was reckless and stealing from Kemet and just being malicious. When really the most Kemetic thing to do, if you had a deity that no longer rock with, or you want to make a political point, the most Kemetic thing to do would be to go deface and deactivate some of these idols and so forth. You know what I mean? So really, and again, I hate to even say this, but it's hard to believe that Jabari is unaware of these things. And if he is aware of these things, then it's really dishonest for him to paint Christians as like singularly the ones who are out of pocket for, destroying these statues and so on and so forth. That's dishonest. If all Kemetics, obviously not every single person, but if it was a Kemetic thing to do, like way before Christians came along, to deface statues to make some sort of political or spiritual point, and he's pinning all of that on Christians as if they just way out of pocket over here, that's dishonest. And if he doesn't know, he doesn't know. Then that's kind of bad on his part. He needs to do his research if he's going to be a Kemetic priest and historian. But if he does know and he continues to make this point, then I would have to call his integrity into question. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know. I don't know if he knows this or not.
Yeah, we have to. We shouldn't be teaching. If there's anybody from his audience in the chat, or if they do see this is something that they should already know. They're supposed to be teaching Black about Kemet, and how you leave this out, that just demonstrates that, those statues were not there for decorations. I mean, I know a lot of them are in museums, but they were not there for decorations. As far as shooting off the nose, attributing that to Napoleon, as a lot of them do. I mean, that's just ludicrous. I mean, that just shows that you don't understand what you're talking about.
Right. To my man Hawkins, let's not forget that the pharaohs removed stones from one tomb to be used for their own tombs. Never mind the fact that the tomb had already been desecrated by the priest. Funny you should mention that, Hawkins, because sometime in the 5th regional year, Amenhotep changed his name to Akhenaten and launched a fervent attack on the existence of gods other than the solar deity Aten. Amun was a special target, and his name and figure was effaced from temples throughout Egypt, including Karnak. Shortly after, the king decided to leave the city for Thebes and move the center of cult, the royal residence, and his burial site to Middle Egypt, to a city he named Akhenaten, modern-day Tel El Amarna. The wealth of the Amun-Ra temple at Karnak was diverted to building projects for the new city, and the temple itself was closed. His devotion to religious affairs caused him to neglect growing rebellion in Western Asia, where the Egyptian priesthood grew increasingly restive at the neglect and suppression of the gods they served. Akhenaten's death was followed by a reaction and the restoration of the traditional pantheon and its worship. Although virtually no trace of the Aten temple at Karnak was left at the site when the temple was dismantled after Akhenaten's death. In the 14th century BC, large-scale reuse of the blocks and subsequent buildings has resulted in recapture of many thousands of them during numerous archaeological repair projects at Karnak over the last 60 years. During this period, more than 25,000 decorated blocks have been removed from monuments in the vicinity of Karnak, and a possibly equal number of undecorated blocks were recovered, but most of the latter were considered unimportant and were reinserted invisibly at various points during the repair and restoration work. So here's the king. All right, it's all about my God now. Amun, he got to go. We're going to destroy his temple. Then when he dies, like, you know what? We didn't like your God to begin with. We're going to take your blocks from your temple. We're going to do our thing. So,
hey, I got some bars on that real quick. I want to do something real quick, right?
Go for it.
I want to issue Jabari Osaze a challenge. Real quick. Okay. Now, I'm not a scholar on Kemet, right? I'm just going to throw this out. As I understand, I'm just a real quick Google search. I mean, you can disregard this date if you need to, but if I'm understanding correctly, Amenhotep IV is what you were referring to. He was around between like 1380 to 1336 BCE. So that's about, say, 13 to 1400 years before Christ, before Christ was even around to kick off Christianity, right? So I said that to say clearly the defacing of Egyptian monuments and statues and so forth predates Christianity. Okay. Now he wants to argue with respect to Asar, Aset, and Haru that because there's similarities to between what he believes to be similarities between Jesus, Mary, and so forth, the whole virgin story and all that. He wants to say that we borrowed that from Kemet because there's similarities. He believes to be similarities between that and Osiris, Asar, and so forth, right? Asar, Aset, and Haru. Excuse me. All right. So here's my challenge, right? If you're going to say that Christians, on the basis of these supposed similarities between Asar, Aset, and Haru, and then the Jesus narrative, particularly the early part with the Virgin Mary and so forth, based on those similarities, you're saying that one borrowed from the other. Will you be consistent and toe that same line with respect to iconoclasm and Christians in the first century defacing Egyptian statues, monuments, and so forth? Will you be consistent to say that it wasn't these Christians being out of pocket, but they got that from Kemet, right? Because your whole thing is about similarities, right? You say there's similarities between the virgin narrative with Jesus and Sar, Aset, and Haru. Based on similarities, you're saying that one came from another. So based on the similarity between Christians in the first century defacing Egyptian monuments, statues, and temples, and Akhenaten and the gang doing that over a millennium before, are you willing to say that it wasn't just a Christian thing, that these first century Christians were just defacing stuff, but they actually got that from Kemet? It was a Kemetic thing. It's actually from Kemet. Is he willing to be consistent like that? That's my challenge for him. If not, then to me, I think that he comes down a couple notches with respect to being a reliable source of information and having the integrity to face the truth. I'm just keeping it real with you. Are you going to follow your own rationale? That's what I want to know.
Up on that, there was cases of, as we talked about, legitimate actual iconoclasm, but that's separate from the issue of did Christians rip off ancient pagan Kemet? He's trying to tie these things together,
right.
But is that really the case? And as you guys have already discussed, and we could discuss more, the Kemetic, practitioners of Egyptian religion vandalized and defaced some statues before Christians did. Now, no, we're not saying that that's all they ever did, because the ancient Egypt does have a very conservative bent to it. And so it wasn't like everyone was always doing this all the time, but it did happen in key waves. So we can't act like the Christians came in and were the first to do it. They weren't. And, by and large, from the accounts that I've looked at and that what we know of, it's mainly native people doing it. I feel like he paints a picture of like a bunch of white Europeans marching in with crosses and shields like crusaders, but in the 3rd century or something, and like, chopping off stuff and doing all this, and like that's kind of but actually it's different when you read some of the accounts of these priests and these deacons, and then they would sometimes convert these into churches. I mean, it's very fascinating the way Kemet was conquered by Christianity, Jabari. It was spiritually and philosophically and ideologically. It was not done with warfare, unlike Islam later. Right. Now, Islam later did do that to Kemet, and there was iconoclasm there as well, but less so is my understanding in regards to actual inscriptions, because as was already mentioned, most folks, you weren't really reading the hieroglyphs. You didn't know what to say. So it's like, you got to know what to cross out. Like if you're in a tag battle, you got to know the graph artist who's who you're going after. You don't just tag out everything.
Them toy bombers. You know what I mean?
You know, in the cross out war, you know who's got you're looking for, right? So you'd have to have that happen. But some of it is a little more like, it's less sensationalistic than that. There's a review of this, this Brooklyn Art Museum display we've been talking about iconoclasm, called Striking Power. And in one of the reviews at hyperallegoric.com, one thing that's interesting, I'm just going to read this real quick. Last thing I'm going to say, and sometimes Muslims did this, and I think sometimes Christians get attributed for things that happen under Islamic rule, because it's not always clear. Now, obviously with the crosses, that's not the case. Okay. I'm just saying, but some of it was reuse Sometimes the Muslims no understood what something meant, so they would reshape them into construction, and there was reuse. And then there's a question about is reuse honoring it by using it for something moving forward, or is it dishonoring it? Is it a negative or a positive value? Do you see what I'm saying? There's like different thoughts and questions about that. And so I just point that all out. And really, none of this would have happened if the prophecies against ancient Egypt didn't come true. When you read the Old Testament prophets, they prophesy against Egypt and tell the Egyptians they will never be the powerhouse they once were. And that is what has happened in ancient Egypt, spiritually with Christianity and militarily with Islam. And that's why this has ultimately happened, because of sin in ancient Egypt prophesied against by ancient Hebrew prophets. And you see prophecy after prophecy against ancient Egypt for wickedness. And they were conquered by empires when they lost their own empire. And that's a fact. Now, the beauty of it is Egypt was also included in Isaiah as one of the places that will be uniting with Israel in worship of Yahweh, along with Assyria. And so that's not all there is to the story. And so that's the beauty of Coptic Christians and folks like that to this day. But I just bring some of that out to tie that together. And really, that doesn't prove anything related to Jesus existing or not. We're on this total other tangent because Jabari's like, look at me with this cross etched into here. Isn't this sad? Did Jesus exist or not, man? What are we doing? He's trying to tie them together in that way.
Right.
But let me stop.
Yeah, let's keep it pushing. Adam, can you get to the Spaceballs reference that he stole from vocab?
We're not talking about that here. Let's continue. All right, great. The fourth thing you have to understand is the Christian tradition does not have to be exactly the same as the Kemetic tradition. That is the point. If the Christian tradition was the same as earlier traditions, then we would actually be talking about the Kemetic tradition in its changes and alterations. But as you see theft, and then you see destruction, you cannot say that these things are the same. You're not going to see that these things are the same. But we should still recognize the origin. Now, maybe I'm dating myself a bit here. But as you look at this, I want you to see the image of Star Wars and Spaceballs. For some of you who are 70s kids, 80s kids, you probably get this reference here. Star Wars was the original, right? Star Wars was the original. But clearly, as Mel Brooks put forward his parody of Star Wars, if you watched Spaceballs, it was clear that Spaceballs was based on Star Wars. We can recognize the relationship.
All right, you stop there.
That's what we're talking about here.
You can stop it there. All right, so first and foremost, horrible analogy. It's horrible, right? Now I'm gonna quibble a little, and they like when he quibbles. So I hope they suffer me this indulgence to quibble, because he says that Star Wars is the original, right? It's not. It's not the original. When Frank Herbert published Dune World, the first part of what would become the novel Dune in analog science fiction and fact in 1963, it was a moment that would reverberate through modern science fiction for decades to come, especially on the big screen, where the story's influence could now still be felt to this day. In fact, you can easily track how Herbert's creation led to some of the biggest blockbuster franchises of all time. But there perhaps no bigger student of Herbert, Jodorowsky, or Dune than George Lucas, who clearly looked at Paul Atreides' adventures of Icarus when crafting Luke Skywalker's own quest in the galaxy far, far away. There are so many similarities between Dune and Star Wars that if you squint a little, you could even call the 1977 blockbuster the first successful Herbert adaptation. And here's a chart to show, right? Star Wars, Princess Leia. Dune, Princess Aaliyah. Star Wars, villain turns out to be the hero's father. Dune, villain turns out to be the hero's grandfather. Star Wars, Tatooine, a desert planet. Dune, Icarus. Dune, a desert planet. Star Wars, Sandcrawler, vehicle piloted by Jawas left over from a forgotten mining era long ago. Dune, Sandcrawler, vehicle piloted by Americans used to mine for spice. Star Wars, moisture farmers like Uncle Owen. Dune, dew collectors, used by freemen to line concave planting depressions where they produce a small but reliable source of water. Right? Star Wars, spice mines. Dune, spice. Star Wars, Jedi mind trick. Dune, the voice. Star Wars, Jedi Bindu. Dune, Pranda Bindu. Right? So he doesn't even get the nerd stuff right. Is what I'm trying to say. Right? So Star Wars is not even the original. So he don't even know that. But he's a forensic historian, right? So
my favorite line in Spaceballs though is when Dark Helmet says, "So, Lone Star, now you see that evil will always triumph because good is dumb."
Wow.
I thought that was funny.
Very good. So Spaceballs, right, is a 1987 American space opera parody, right? And he says as much that it's a parody. But the thing is, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. If he understood what a parody means, he would know that this undercuts his argument. Because a parody is a literary or musical work in which the style of an author or work closely imitated for a comic effect or in ridicule. So it's like you see how it borrows heavily. It's supposed to. Spaceballs is not trying to act as if it's an original composition. It has to refer to Star Wars for you to get the punchline. It's not plagiarism. It's purposely and continually referring to Star Wars. Because if it doesn't, you don't get the ha-ha. You don't get the laugh.
That's the point, exactly.
That's the whole point. That's why instead of Darth Vader, it's Dark Helmet.
Dark Helmet, right.
Right? They're purposely, they want you to remember the original. Because if you don't remember it, you're not going to get the joke. Horrible analogy by Jabari. So.
It's from bad to worse, man. But yeah, because we keep pushing forward again.
Yeah, let's keep going. Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
They don't have to be exactly the same for you to recognize the origin of some of these ideas, the origin of some of the texts, the origin of some of the characters. You are going to see that today. Clearly, as we unpeel this, as we follow the breadcrumbs, as we retrace the footprints, we will see what is the original and what is the copy. Let's continue. First of all, I want to really say something about this, and I would have really liked.
This is my favorite part.
Really like.
Hey, this is my favorite part of the video coming up.
Of course,
Garfield to be here for this, because Garfield speaks a lot about this topic. But I want you to understand, in order to win a debate that discusses two different positions, two different topics, what you have to do is you have to be able to understand both of them. And one of the things I think is interesting is we can look at the scholars that Garfield speaks to. This will help us understand how his ideas are being shaped. You might know, if you follow his work on YouTube, that he actually has his, as he calls it, 20 for 20. During Black History Month, by the way, he didn't just say February, he actually said Black History Month. During Black History Month, he pulls together scholars to talk about issues. So who are the scholars that Garfield is speaking to? Well, here are many of them. I'd actually say these are all of them that he's spoken to since nearly 2018. Take a look at the 12 biblical scholars that he's had on, some of them several times. Here are the 12 biblical scholars that he's spoken to. He's also spoken to 4 preachers, apologists, and theologians.
Hey,
shout out to Pastor Bennett.
Hey, can you pause that
Shout out to
too?
Pastor Bennett. Hey, look at
So
that.
you see
Look
Pastor Bennett, Nefertiti, Adam Coleman. The guy in the middle, Dennis McDonald, he referred to him as a pastor, preacher, a theologian. Dennis McDonald
He's a mythicist, right?
Yeah, he claims that the New Testament was a ripoff of Homer.
Oh,
Yeah, he has a quote. It's easy to find online. That where people were talking about his in regards to his theory. If he's right, then nearly everything on an early Christian narrative is flawed. Like he also thinks all the scholarship, modern scholarship, is wrong because it's missed the obvious ripoff from Homeric epics. He's got him on there. He's not an apologist. He's a hardcore.
And Dennis R.
critic.
McDonald,
bro. That's what I'm saying.
and if I'm correct, Carrier bases a lot of his work on Dennis R. McDonald.
Yeah, he posted Carrier's face too.
Wait a minute.
Well, I'm just saying. I'm just saying Carrier
category.
Guys, wait. We're missing the point. Y'all are killing my shine right here.
Sorry.
You know what I'm saying? Pastor Bennett and Adam Coleman. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to Pastor Bennett in the chat.
Good
Adam
photo
Coleman,
too. Good photos. Good photos.
It's a very good photo. Like we made it into Jabari's presentation, and y'all are coming with all this scholarship.
I'm sorry, my bad.
McDonald, man.
We're trying to take your shine, bro.
Y'all
take a bow. Take it. Bro, here's your flowers. Take your flowers, bro. You deserve your flowers, bro.
I thought he was saying that Garfield had interviewed Lennox Lewis. My bad.
Oh
wow.
But actually, but I mean, as funny as this is, but isn't it hilarious though that again, I keep telling y'all, man, Jabari is not a reliable source of information, and I'm not trying to be. I'm really not trying to be mean. I'm just saying, I personally don't understand how you get a guy who doesn't believe Jesus existed is a mythicist. And you put him as a pastor, apologist, or whatever other preacher.
You guys, look up
McDonald's that's hilarious. Book. That's hilarious.
If someone doesn't believe us, look up this book, Christianizing Homer, The Odyssey, Plato, and the Acts of Andrew.
Wow.
You gotta look this up, man. It's really, really some wild stuff, man.
He's gonna say something else in here too.
The Homeric epics and the Gospel of Mark. That's another one of McDonald's books. The Legend and the Apostle, the battle for Paul in story and canon.
The battle for Paul.
Does the New Testament imitate Homer? 4 cases from the Acts of the Apostles. 2 shipwreck gospels. These are his book titles. I know it's a minor thing, but it's really not so minor because like, how many of these do you let slide? You know, it's like, anyways, man.
Yes, that's Garfield in the corner, Shotty. That's Garfield. Yeah.
Oh man.
All right, so let's continue. We're almost done here.
And 4 scholars on the Black Hebrews or Jews. 3 scholars who are atheists: Tim O'Neill, David Fitzgerald, Dr. Joshua Bowen. 2 individuals, scholars, who spoke to him about Assyria and Sumer: Cornelia Wunsch and Brother Chuck Morgan. And then 1 scholar on Islam, 1 scholar on genetics, and 1 scholar on ancient Kemetic.
Hey, shout out to my man, Dr. David Falk, y'all.
David Falk, right.
You made it, doctor.
How can you get a clear idea of this if these are the people that he speaks to? Clearly, this should help you understand that Garfield was never prepared for this debate.
Yeah.
That, in fact, he has no knowledge of it.
But it's funny. If you look at all the people, like he just posted a slew of people, all of whom he's covering different worldviews.
Right.
Some of these people aren't even believers. You got Egyptologists, people who are credentialed in the field. But so you can canvas a diversity of guests who have some of whom have expertise at the doctoral level, but because you're talking to these folks, you have no knowledge of the subject. Like, what is he thinking, bro? Like, I don't get it, man. That's y'all boy. That's y'all boy.
I remember speaking to him once, and he was arguing with me about a comment that Dr. Clark made on a video. And
that's all this a
Black
little bit,
Jesus
Adam.
Minister played that video.
It wasn't an
over
argument.
and over, and I would have. That's
a little bit more.
But rudeness was clearly not something that I would think you couldn't call what he was doing rude. They were pointed. And the point of his comments were, clearly you're a Christian, and you argue that Jesus did all of these miraculous things. In fact, that is why you're a Christian. But now as you sit here as a quote unquote scholar, you're saying none of those things matter. And so then he read portions of the tradition that say, in order to be a Christian, you have to believe these things. So how in the world could you argue that you're making these arguments based on a purely historical basis, a purely architectural basis, a purely textual basis, when we know that you believe this because you are a believer by definition? That's what he was asking. And I'm going to tell you, there are a bunch of people that would love for him to simply disappear. But that brother is asking some tough questions. And I actually, in my conversation with Carl, had asked a few questions that I thought were leading, but I didn't take them to the end. I was waiting to the end of our conversation to do some of that. And I was really hoping that someone else would come in. Chris did come in and ask that very, very diligent question. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Nicholas Thomas Wright. He is a critically important biblical scholar for over 50 years. He was the Bishop of Dunham in the UK for 7 years. He's a research professor in the New Testament and early Christianity at St. Mary's College. He was there for many years until 2019. He's a senior research fellow at Wycliffe Hall at Oxford University. He's the author of over 70 books. And he's known for his Christian Origins and the Question of God series. What does he say about looking at this argument? Listen to what he says very clearly. He says, I have taken it for granted that Jesus of Nazareth existed. Listen to what he said. I have taken for granted that Jesus of Nazareth existed. Some writers feel a need to justify this assumption at length against people who try from time to time to deny it. It would be easier, frankly, to believe that Tiberius Caesar, Jesus' contemporary, was a figment of the imagination than to believe that there never was a person such as Jesus. I want you to understand that what he is saying is that he's taken it for granted. And that is not what we want anyone to do. What we want to do is we want to deal with the historicity, to deal with the data, so we're able to understand exactly
with the data
what occurred.
Okay, I wanted to play that right quick because I want to. This came up again. Shout out to Pastor Ben. This came up in their dialogue afterwards. I wanted to kind of bring up this quote. Thank you. So, this is what Jabari was quoting from. All right, now this comes. I thought I had it on the screen, but I'll put it in the description of the video or chat or something like that. Comments rather. So this quote comes from a book that N.T. Wright wrote called Jesus, the Victory of God. Right. So on page 19, right. I'm just going to read this real quick. And again, I told y'all, I done told y'all already, that your boy Jabari has a talent for taking people out of context. You know what I'm saying? As my man Bennett checked them on in their dialogue, he takes people's statements and he repurposes them for his own ends out of context of what people are actually saying. You know. So anyway, this is a perfect example. So this is N.T. Wright. This is from his work called, Jesus, the Victory of God. And it says, second, I have taken it for granted. And he left out the second part. We're going to come back to that. He says, second, I have taken it for granted that Jesus of Nazareth existed. Some writers feel a need to justify this assumption at length against people who try from time to time to deny it. It would be easier, frankly, to believe that Tiberius Caesar, Jesus' contemporary, was a figment of the imagination than to believe that there was never such a person as Jesus. Those who persist in denying this obvious point will probably not want to read a book like this anyway. That's the full quote. Now, funny enough, that last sentence, I was just going to throw this in real quick. He says, those who persist in denying this obvious point, i.e. Jesus' existence, will probably not want to read a book like this anyway. What he's saying is people who deny the existence of Jesus are so scholastically unserious that they probably wouldn't want to read his serious work anyway. That's what he's saying. But that being aside, and I just find it so funny that Jabari has placed himself in that category, and he quoted this. But anyway, context clue out off the rip. You know what I'm saying he starts by saying second. All right, Now, again, context clue. Somebody says second, then there must have been a first, right? We're talking about a series of points being made here. Now, what is the series of points that N.T. Wright is trying to make? Okay. Now, N.T. Wright, again, this is he has Jesus, it has entitled Jesus, the Victory of God. This is volume 2, page 19. So people can go check it out themselves. I'm not putting words in this man's mouth. This part comes in like the introductory portion of the book, right? And often with authors, what you see is before they get into the meat of their arguments and so forth, they'll try to frame the book for you, right? They try to give you a framework to how, you know, to approach their work, and they'll give you the parameters of their work, okay? So again, page 19, that's exactly what N.T. Wright is doing, right? So I'm gonna go to my next slide here. He actually gives you, there's actually 8 points, right? So that second is the second of 8 points that the N.T. Wright is making. And the first point that he makes, as he's giving a framework for how he approaches this work and the parameters of the work, he's saying things like, just for the reader to know, he's going to use the lowercase g, when he spells out God. He's going to use the term Jesus rather than Christ. The second point, he's going to take for granted that Jesus existed, meaning it's outside of the scope of this particular book to investigate the question of whether or not Jesus existed. He wasn't speaking about his overall perspective as to the evidence or lack thereof, or whatever, how you want to construe it, on whether or not Jesus existed. He was saying that for this specific book, in this specific work, one of the parameters that I have in place is I'm going to take it for granted that Jesus existed. I'm not exploring the question of whether or not Jesus existed. That's the second point that he's trying to make. Then he goes on to make other points. Like he talks about how he's going to be, Jesus, the victory of God, revolves around the synoptic gospels. So he's in terms of his parameters, again, he's not factoring in the book of John, right? So he's giving you his framework. He's not interacting with everybody. This is point number 4. He's not interacting with everyone and everything in the field. And he actually apologized. He said, if I didn't interact with your work, my bad. I can't interact with everybody because there's too much in the field. Point number 5, not all portions of Jesus' narrative receive the same degree of attention in Jesus, the victory of God. So there's some parts of Jesus' narrative that he talks about a lot. Some that he talks about a little. It's not all treated the same. Point number 6, he works to avoid over exegesis and under exegesis. Point number 7, the book does not attempt to follow the synoptic gospel of Jesus' life straight through, but rather arranges the material by themes. And then point number 8, he takes it that the first century Jews consider themselves to be still in exile. And he understands that, this is contrary to what many of his critics think, N.T. Wright's critics think. And so he's putting out at the outset that he's coming from that perspective, in light of the fact that he recognizes, hey, I know some of y'all are going to disagree, but nevertheless, this is where I'm coming from. So my point is, what Jabari seems to not understand is that he treated N.T. Wright's statement as if N.T. Wright was talking about his overall perspective about the Jesus question, or whether Jesus existed or not. And that Jabari's taking it as if N.T. Wright is just taking it for granted in some unscholarly way. But this, the point that the part that Jabari clipped out was one point in a list of points, where actually what he's doing is he's framing this particular work with respect to Jesus, the Victory of God, volume 2, with respect to that specific book. N.T. Wright lays out the parameters of what he's going to cover. And one of those parameters is he's not getting into the question of whether or not Jesus existed. He's taking that to be the case. It's like an agreed upon, common ground that he's taken with the reader. So Jabari, bro, again, this is reading comprehension. All you had to do was read the entire chapter, and not even the entire chapter, just read a couple paragraphs where N.T. Wright is covering these things. And you would have seen that he wasn't making a statement about his overall approach to the question of whether or not Jesus existed. He was talking about, in that specific work, Jesus, Victory of God, volume 2, how he was approaching that specific work. And he was saying that the question of Jesus' existence was outside the parameters of that particular book. So again, shout out to Pastor Bennett. Your boy Jabari has got caught once again with his hand in the cookie jar. He seems to have a really hard time of taking people at their word rather than repurposing what they say and then leveraging it for his own purposes.
Yes, and N.T. Wright is a prolific, prodigious, proficient scholar. I'm Reformed. I'm not going to completely agree with him. So it's not about that. It's about respecting and understanding the scholarship. I don't think he's really that familiar with N.T. Wright. He's trying to use him in a certain way.
Right.
That's really inaccurate. It's like, look, even they're smart people. They just go around assuming this. N.T. Wright's dealing with different questions. frankly, most historians and scholars don't deal with the mythicist question because they consider the position not that scholarly. Some do. N.T. Wright's not one of them. But if you look, it's a 3-volume series he's got: Christian Origins and the Question of God, and then the third one, Resurrection of the Son of God. And if you've ever held a physical copy of that, we are talking huge books. These are big, massive works. He's putting there's a lot into it, and it's not just fluff, you know.
Right.
And he does whole sections on like his method and historiography, as you could tell by part of what Adam said, and makes an amazing case, I think, for the resurrection of Jesus. I'm not the only one. Even people who disagree with Wright on issues, say justification, soteriology, have lauded and applauded his work on the resurrection. And you just read that book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, and you realize how serious and in-depth this is. And it's sort of a cheap trick, the way he was misused there, sort of a cheap trick. And I did like what Adam said. That was good. Where you said, hey, context clue. He said second. That was good because you're teaching the audience. You're teaching the audience
Right.
how to be more discerning readers and listeners when they read something. Also, when they see these quotes, that was good. And so it was really that was kind of a cheap trick. And if Jabari wants, then he should get some of the books dealing with the existence of Jesus. The Jesus Legend. This is a great book by Eddie and Boyd. This is a fantastic book. That's not the only one. Reinventing Jesus. Now, it deals with different issues, but it also deals with parallelomania. This is an excellent book. I'm just grabbing out a couple. There's a chapter in Jones' book, Conspiracies and the Cross, primarily focused on Mithras. But these are just some books at different levels. And I have a whole section because I dealt with atheist mythicists a lot before Hebrew Israelites and stuff. And in fact, some of the atheist scholars of Scripture think this mythicist trend is ridiculous. Specifically, Maurice Casey. He really shreds a lot of this Christ mythicist stuff. He himself is a non-believing atheist scholar. Evidence and Arguments on Mythicist Myths. This is a great book. If you don't trust the Christians I just put forward, or N.T. Wright, then read Casey's work. But I mean, there's a lot there. But Jabari's not really proving his point. He's sort of simply playing into his audience's suspicions, and to a certain extent, the listening audience lack of familiarity with these issues. And it's just not fair because it's like you're not really teaching the audience at that point. You're just trying to win something and show something versus really do what he says he is primarily, which is an educator. And that's what that should ultimately be about. And he's not doing it justice. He's not doing it justice when he plays some of those games, with all due respect.
Facts. All right.
Yeah,
so
let me just
MJ, go ahead.
Let me also just point out, I mean, those are some great books. You also got Richard Baucham's book, Jesus and the Eyewitness, right? Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. So Baucham is going to deal with people like Papias, okay? And Papias has a connection to the followers of the disciples, Philip's daughters. You're not going to hear Jabari talk about Papias. You're not going to hear Jabari talk about Philip's daughters. These are supposed to be people explained away by the myths, not to mention that, myths take a while to build up, even on a historical figure. So I mean, once again, we shouldn't have to be explaining these things to his audience. I mean, of course we can, because we love people and want them to know the truth, but this dude is supposed to be a scholar.
Right.
How can bro? I'm telling you, just recently I saw it was a video with him, and I think it was Chris Harris, where he was making a case for himself. Jabari was making a case for himself for being an expert and a historian. Even though he only has a bachelor's degree in history, I'm not dissing that. I respect to him for that. But he's saying he's a historian, according to him. He's an expert, and so that when you put yourself out there that way, then you have to expect the people to critique you on that level. If that's the lane that you're going to put yourself in, then that's how you're going to be critiqued. And for me, how can I have any confidence that you're a historian of ancient history that has to deal with these ancient Semitic languages and the Meta-Nature and so on and so forth? How can I have any confidence that you are a historian and an expert when you aren't reading and keeping track of basic context clues of a modern work that was written in English, your native language? You know what I'm saying? So I think that it's things like that, and I really don't mean that to be flippant. I'm being dead serious. Like those are the kinds of things. Like when I'm studying and looking for people to learn from. This is just Adam Coleman. Okay, like these are the kind of red flags that tells me that hey, this particular person is not a reliable source of information. That's how I look at things. You know what I mean?
Real quick, I want to continue on, but can I ask you guys a question real quick? There's a part where he chastises Garfield. Have you read any of John Henry Clarke's books? Which specific books do you guys think Jabari would have in mind out of Clarke's books that would specifically best be relevant to the question of Jesus' existence? I'm saying, what do you guys think? I don't know which one he would immediately be thinking of. What do you guys have any theories? What specifically?
Yeah,
Or maybe
just
Clarke. He has a few books, but these are books largely of his lectures and speeches. But guess what? When you listen to John Henry Clarke, I mean, a lot of what he says is rhetorical too. He's not engaging this subject with any type of scholarly depth. I mean, it's assertion. African spirituality was stolen from Kemet and turned into religion, and I don't debate. I only debate my equals. All others I teach. I mean, that's the type of garbage that you're going to get. And I do have a few of his books. I have read what he's had to say, and I mean it's not scholarly. It's speeches, so you're not going to see any citations within a lot of speeches. I mean, come on now. I mean, now if he's talking about Dr. Ben, I read Dr. Ben's stuff as well, and it's nothing special either.
So I agree with that. From what I know of both of them, I mean, Dr. Ben, he got exposed at the end of his life. As far as academics are concerned, but when you look at Dr. Clarke here, I was just trying to figure out what would he be talking about specific that would be so relevant to this. I was just trying because, like, if he said,
I don't know what specific work.
Like, for example, if he said you have, if I said you haven't read Eddie and Boyd's work on this, anyone familiar with some of the recent literature, and they would probably know he means the Jesus Legend, because that's a common book that's known about that specific thing. I'm just like, okay, what are some specific series talking about Clarke? I'm just because I would like, well, okay, I'll take a look at Clarke's stuff and more in depth. Then we'll see what do you get, right. What is there? Right. What's it? Because just asking sort of a gotcha. Well, I wonder if he had read any. Well, what is there that's going to change this discussion or argument? What's there? I don't know.
That's a great question.
And to be honest with you, I'm not even sure. And I'm saying that is a great question. But in terms of the way that Jabari framed it, I don't even know if it's necessarily like that relevant. And here's what I mean by that. He said that unless you've read, and I'm paraphrasing, he said unless you've read like the other side, then you really can't.
Yeah,
you're not fit to be in debate about these things.
But
and I don't even think that's necessarily true. I mean, you can have studied a particular side on a position and have what you believe to be sound arguments and to make a positive case for your position without being necessarily well versed with everything that everybody else has made to counter your position. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you can have a strong argument for your case without necessarily having an in-depth knowledge of somebody else's case. So I don't even think fundamentally that's even true, that somehow Garfield is disqualified because there's three people saying Asa Hilliard, Dr. Clarke, and Dr. Ben that he hasn't read. Like, so there's three people he hasn't read, so therefore he's disqualified from the whole conversation. That's silly. And that's pretty silly.
What I'm in a nice way trying to get at is I don't think those folks are relevant in any way to Jesus scholarship. So it's really a red herring. It's irrelevant anyway. They haven't done relevant work. And that's what I'm saying. Am I missing something in the field? Like me, us knowing the other side of the Jesus myth question is, let's take have you looked at Richard Carrier? Well, I've looked at him. In multiple books I've read. In fact, I debated him. Have you looked at David Fitzgerald? Well, I debated him too and read his book, Nailed, and some other stuff. Well, what about you go down this list and you see like Christ mythicists and you look at different Oral Doherty, the Jesus Puzzle, or some of the documentaries, whether it be, Zeitgeist or the God who wasn't there, okay, what is it that you're telling us? Or are you going back to the old ones? Are you going back to the really old ones now? Who
It seems like the OGs, you know what I mean?
So
to him,
we've looked at some of those of actual Christ mythicists. Clark and those guys aren't in the conversation. He's just mentioning them, but they're not really relevant to Jesus scholarship. I'm just saying he's saying that, but what is there that's relevant to historical Jesus scholarship? That's not their specialty, and I don't think they really talked about it too much. So I want to know what he's talking about. But anyways,
well, I think even worse too, because the overall point he's making is that these Christians and biblical scholars are biased. You know what I mean? And I think that's problematic as well, because the reality is nobody's a blank slate. Everybody comes into the conversation with background knowledge and perspectives. You know what I mean? And so this notion that all Christians are biased, he said something like, as he was kind of leading into the NT Wright point, like there are certain things that are definitional to being a believer. So how can you be objective when you are a believer? And it's like, dude, like just because you're a believer, like what's the basis of the belief? If you're somebody who's like NT Wright, who believes, and I'm just making an assumption, but like say if I'll take NT Wright of it. If you're a person who believes in Christianity on the basis of the historical evidence to support the resurrection, right? Then it's not blind belief. I'm saying, and it's not that you're not being objective. You just take something to be the case. Having an affirmative position on something being the case doesn't mean that you're biased, such that you can't assess, information or arguments, to your for or against. You know what I mean? So his whole position on, oh, these people are biased or they just believers. Well, no, if somebody believes on the basis of evidence or some rational grounds, then that has nothing to do with bias necessarily. It just means that they affirm something to be true, which all people do.
And also Jabari himself would disqualify himself. He himself is what they call in academic world in regards to these questions. He himself is confessional. He says he's a priest of ancient Kemetic religion. I'm quoting the ancestors. No one in real academia would think it's relevant to quote people whose phenotype is like yours. That he's incredibly confessional in that way. So then he's saying, well, these Christians or these atheists or whatever. Well, and it's so bad he can't tell the difference between someone who thinks Homer is the basis for the New Testament and Adam Coleman. I'm just saying it's a lot of bad.
And to your point though, that's perfect, because here's the thing. He would disqualify us because we affirm Christianity to be true, right? But then we could turn around and say, well, you believe that Christianity is false. You have a stance on Christianity. So you have a slant. Like you're not coming to the table, squeaky clean here. So you believe that Kemeticism is true. So if you don't believe we can be objective about Christianity because we're Christians, then I can say you're not objective about Kemeticism because you're a Kemetic. You said the shoe fits on both sides.
Let me just say this. Yeah, let me just say this. One way to guard against bias and is to put your worldview on the table, right? And also have a method that's airtight. So when we look at Garfield's method, there are so many holes, and he's already engaging in too many fallacies to name, namely the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. And then when we point out, when we point to essentials of a hypothesis and accidentals of a hypothesis, he can't even distinguish the differences.
Right.
And so this is not
that's good. So listen, guys, we're approaching the 2-hour mark. So I want to really get to this last clip so we can take this home. So
now, let me just say, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because the title is "Why Did Garfield Take This Debate?"
Fast forward this a little bit.
Did not take the debate. Obviously, Christianity and including Islam. Let's listen to what Carl Jung. Yes, that Carl Jung, the Carl Jung that is the psychiatrist and scholar on the human mind. Listen to what he says about this. The Osiris cult offers an excellent example of this. At first, only Pharaoh participated in the transformation of the god, since he alone had an Osiris, but later the nobles of the empire acquired an Osiris too. And finally, this development culminated in the Christian idea that everyone has an immortal soul and shares directly in the Godhead. This is from his book, Collected Works of C.G. Jung. Now, keep in mind that this is a collection of his very voluminous work. So he didn't actually write this book, but it puts together his work. This one is volume 9, part 1.
All right. This is the part of his presentation where he cheddar bobs himself. He cheddar bobs himself. It's a mortal wound. He can't come back from this one. He actually destroys his entire argument right here. Why am I saying that? Because in the beginning, right, it says Osaze is the archetype. Now, he used this term earlier in his presentation, right? Osaze is an archetype for not just a deity who was betrayed, murdered, and resurrected, but also for the immortality of the human soul. And he's quoting C.G. Jung, right? Volume 9, part 1. Okay, well, I happen to have that book as well. And Mr. Jung explains what he means by archetypes. And again, right, we got to define terms. What does he mean when he says archetype, right? All right, so it's a little deep. Stay with me, though. A more or less superficial layer of the unconscious is undoubtedly personal. I call it the personal unconscious. But this personal unconscious rests upon a deeper layer, which does not derive from personal experience and is not a personal acquisition, but is inborn. This deeper layer I call the collective unconscious. I have chosen the term collective because this part of the unconscious is not individual, but universal. In contrast to the personal psyche, it has content and modes of behavior that are more or less the same everywhere and in all individuals. It is, in other words, identical in all men and thus constitutes a common psychic substrate of superpersonal nature, which is present in every one of us. What the word archetype means in the nominal sense is clear enough then from its relations with myth, esoteric teaching, and fairy tale. But if we try to establish what an archetype is psychologically, the matter becomes more complicated. So far, mythologists have always helped themselves out with the solar, lunar, methodological, vegetal, and other ideas of the kind. The fact that myths are first and foremost psychic phenomenon that reveal the nature of the soul is something they have absolutely refused to see until now. Primitive man impresses us too strongly with his subjectivity that we should really have guessed long ago that myths refer to something psychic. His knowledge of nature is essentially the language and outer dress of an unconscious psychic process. But the very fact that this process is unconscious gives us the reason why man has thought of everything except the psyche in his attempts to explain myths. He simply didn't know that the psyche contains all the images that have ever given rise to myths, and that our unconscious is an acting and suffering subject with an inner drama which primitive man rediscovers by means of analogy in the process of nature, both great and small. So when he's talking about archetype, he's talking about these ideas are innate in man. They do not come from external phenomena. That's already embedded in us. It's inborn, these ideas, okay? And I want to read an article here that really hones in on the origin story for Mr. Jung's concept of the archetype. This is from Anthony Daniels, and it's entitled Carl Jung, the Madame Blavatsky of Psychotherapy. So he kind of gives us the origin story, right? He kind of gives the origin story of how Mr. Jung, it's crazy, right? Yeah. How he comes about this concept, this collective conscious archetype motif, right? One of his patients, who was gone down in history as the solar phallus man, thought, among many other strange things, that there was a phallus that emerged from the sun and that by causing this solar appendage to move, he controlled the weather, particularly the wind. Jung subsequently discovered that his reading about ancient myths, that there was a Persian Mithric belief of exactly the same kind as his patient's. Now, his patient was not well educated or widely read man. So it seemed to Jung impossible that he had learned of the Mithric myth from external sources. He therefore concluded that the form of myths were almost, as we should now put it, hardwired into the human psyche. And he called these forms archetypes. The collective unconscious was full of archetypes. So back to his definition: to plagiarize, to steal or pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own without crediting the source. Here's my question to the panelists and to the chat. Can I steal something that I am in possession of already?
No, sir.
Because that's what Jung is talking about in archetype, right? You can't tell me that I stole your piece of chicken. You know why? Because it's not just your piece of chicken. It's our piece of chicken. In fact, it's been our piece of chicken since the beginning of man.
What is a pizza chicken?
A piece of chicken.
Just kidding, man.
A piece of chicken. You see what I'm saying? So when he says archetype, what Mr. Jung is saying is that it's already in us. So this idea of an Osiris, well, that's not an original concept. We're all inborn with that hero motif.
Yeah.
Now,
It's a priori.
Right? Now, the Christians might call him Jesus, but it's the same motif. Why? Because we share a collective conscience. According to Mr. Jung, I don't agree, but according to Mr. Jung, that's what he is conveying. We all have the same thing. So how am I stealing something that we all share collectively as a species? It's innate. It's hardwired in me. There's no thievery here.
Not only can you not steal something that you already have, because you're right. If Carl Jung, who Jabari quoted as his source, is saying that all of the horrors, what anything that he considers to be myth, all these myths come from this inborn set of archetypes, then not only can you not steal it because they're already in you, they're coming from the inside out. They're not coming from the outside in, as in you haven't stolen it. But not only that, you also Jabari can't claim that Kemet was the originator of any of these myths.
Right.
So not only does he have to concede, if he's going to ride with Carl Jung, he has to concede that Christians didn't steal it. We got all these archetypes from the inside out that everybody in humanity has been imprinted with. But he's also going to have to concede that he needs to give up possession of these Kemetic myths. Like, it's really not yours for real.
It was never yours. It was never yours.
It never. None of this stuff ever came from Kemet. It came from the archetypes that rest in everybody from birth, according to Carl Jung. So he just bodied himself twice with his own source. Cheddar Bob.
And we don't even have to do a part two.
You got Cheddar Bob and Plaxico Burrs.
The gun in the sweatpants. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because from here on out,
go ahead.
I'm going to refer to that. When he does the virgin birth, well, that's an archetype. All what he did, well, that's an archetype, right? That's all innate. It's all inborn. It's hardwired. Where's the thievery?
Where's
it's
at?
Our piece of chicken.
Sorry. Hey, can I share one more thing on the screen real quick?
Yes, sir.
Well, just got to add to it. Again, your boy Jabari has a habit of he's got a talent for taking people out of context. You know what I'm saying? Because when he made this claim, or when he read this this excerpt from Carl Jung, it seemed like he was leveraging it to say that Christians, got their ideas from Kemet or something like that. And it can seem that way if you only take the snippet of the quotation that he read. Now I'm not gonna read the whole thing. I'm just gonna leave this up on the screen because I know we're getting ready to get out of here.
Right.
But it'll be up on the screen long enough for people to read for themselves and see what's going on. But the background to the clip or the comment that the excerpt that Jabari read, if you look at Carl Jung, this is from the same work. Again, it's the Collected Works, Volume 9. This is on page 165 and 166. If you look at the overall argument that Carl Jung is making, it goes back to what you're saying. Like he starts talking about, I want to say maybe about 20 or so pages before this. He's talking about this notion of rebirth. He's trying to get to the bottom of where this idea of rebirth, comes from in the human psyche. That's what he's trying to get to the bottom of, right? And what he does is he starts to explore various different forms of what he refers to as like transformation, different ways that people can experience transformation. You know, he also talks about different ways that people can experience the transcendent, either seeing transcendence within themselves or seeing transcendence in like the world around you and things like that. And so he kind of deals with the experience part, and then he just is kind of cataloging different types of personal transformations that people can experience, you know, when they're engaging in rituals and religion and spirituality, so on and so forth. You know, one of them just happens to be this notion of identifying, you know, with a so-called cult hero, and that's where this quote comes in about Osiris and so on and so forth. Now, with each of the different transformations, you know, types of transformations that Carl Jung is describing, he then gives different examples. And to your point, he's not taking it that any one religion is borrowing from another or any one came. He's just giving examples of what he believes to be a psychological phenomenon,
a collective,
now with a collective experience, right? You know, that anybody could experience regardless of where you come from or what have you. And so, having said all that, he then comes around to this notion of identification with a cult hero, and as he's giving examples, he talks about what's this cat? Oh, let me go back one. The first one he talks about is I can't even. Oh yeah, the metamorphosis of. I can't even pronounce it. Apuleius or something. I can't even pronounce that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he's just basically giving examples, and so he starts there, and then he gets into Osiris, and within that context, he's saying, all right, now finally, you know, this development, you know, in the word development there, he's not referring to this development specifically about Osiris and the beliefs around that, but the development of identifying with a cult hero, that form of transformation. Right. Finally, of all the examples I'm giving, he goes into talking about Christianity. That's the last example that he gives of that particular form.
It's the most modern iteration of the archetype.
Yes, exactly. So he's not saying that Christianity came from, you know, this, you know, outworking of Osiris and so on and so forth. What he's doing is he's giving exactly what you said. Christianity is the most recent historically example of this type of a transformation that he refers to as identification with the cult hero. Of those different examples he gives, finally he gets to Christianity, and then he goes into his next point. But Jabari only reads that one part and gives the impression that Carl Jung is making the argument that that's where Christianity came from. Now, lastly, even if that's the case, right? Carl Jung is a psychologist. Carl Jung is a psychologist, right? If you're gonna, it's like if you want to know who's the greatest rapper of all time, you know what I'm saying? Somebody who's a specialist in country music and has never heard rap before is probably not going to be the right guy you want to go to. You want to go to somebody who knows something about rap. Right. You know what I mean? Likewise, when it comes to fields, if I want to know something about, I don't know, mathematics, I'm not going to go to biologist necessarily. I'm going to go to a mathematician. If I want to know something about biology, I'm not going to go to a physicist. I'm going to go to and you get the point that I'm trying to make. What he's doing is he's trying to leverage a psychologist to make an historical claim, right? So you're out of the it's like he's out of pocket once again, dog. Like if you might want to make a historical claim, you want to grind it. Okay, well talk to historians. They'll say let's leverage historians and go from there. Carl Jung doesn't help your case very much. He doesn't have any expertise in the origins of Christianity, where it came from. That wasn't his bag. He's a psychologist. Right. He's exploring psychological phenomena, not historical origins of Christianity. And so to me, again, and I'm not trying to be harsh, but I'm just going to say it. The fact that you can't recognize that it's inappropriate to try to leverage Carl Jung, a psychologist, to make a point that you should be appealing to historians to make. The fact that you can't recognize that tells me that there's some missteps in how you approach scholarship, such that you're an unreliable source of information. That's what I'm saying.
Something is wrong with you.
Something's wrong. You don't know how to evaluate scholarship. You know how to pull up articles and quote them. You don't know how to handle scholarly material. So I'm just saying, man.
On his Kindle, he did a word search for archetype. He said, "There you go. Let me use that."
All right. He just did a Google search.
Words have meanings. But listen, guys. So we are past the 2-hour mark. I usually ask, what you guys are gonna do next and all that. What you're gonna do next is we're gonna do part 2, right? We gotta figure out when we're gonna do part 2, and part 2 is worse. Part 2 is actually it's worse than this.
Oh man.
I mean, he cheddar bopped himself quite a bit. He really does. I mean, but this one here is a doozy, right?
Same song, second verse, like the first version, but a whole lot worse.
All right.
Yeah. So with that, guys, I'm gonna end it right here. Stay tuned for part 2. We out. Peace.